This episode of Planted is brought to you by Pax Labs.
The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Planted with Sarah Pine. I'm Sarah Pine, your host, and today on Planted, we are joined by Dr. Anna Schwabe, researcher, educator, and one of the leading voices in cannabis genetics. She holds a PhD from the University of Northern Colorado, where her award-winning research focused on genetic and phenotypic variation in cannabis, and she continues to work at the intersection of science, education, and industry. In a space that often runs on hype, Anna brings us back to the data, helping us understand what's actually happening inside the plant and what it means for consistency, regulation, and the future of cannabis. So let's get into it. Anna, I am so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a long time coming.
I know. And we are due a catch up. So before we get into it, because I love geeking out with you, but what was your first cannabis experience?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so my first cannabis experience, like many, happened in high school. So my brother, who is almost 5 years older than me, I was allowed to go out with him. We were allowed to go out on school nights and stay out later on weekends as long as we were with him. And let me tell you, he is not a responsible human being. And he would take us to the gay bars. And the first time that we ever partook, I was with my best friend at the time, and we were in the backseat of his car, and he had some pot and no pipe or anything, but he showed us how to make a pipe out of a pop can, which he had plenty discarded in his backseat. And so that was my first experience, and I really didn't feel anything, but my friend Shay was like, "Oh my God, I'm so thirsty." And I was like, "Well, let's get some water." And so we went to the kitchen and we got water. And she's like, "Oh my God, it's like an ocean in my mouth." And so that was when, I mean, this was in like, I want to say like 1990.
Uh-huh.
I'm dating myself there, but that's okay, because like whatever, you can figure that out. And then, we kind of got into cannabis a little bit, not like heavy, but like every now and then, parties, whatnot, whatever. We found some bag seed, and under my parents' staircase there was a crawl space with a light, and I switched out the light to a grow light and popped a couple of seeds in there, and then put the little like cover on it, and thought, "Oh, well, I can grow some pot under the seat under the stairs." Of course, my dad saw the light, on under the stairs, glowing in the little cracks, and he's like, "What's going on under there?" And he found the little pot plants, and he, I got grounded. I had to cut the tops off and throw them in the garden, and then, I got grounded for that. And then, college, I was, anatomy and physiology was my focus, specifically animals, because I thought I wanted to be a vet. That did not turn out that way. But I took a lot of classes that had nothing to do with my major. Anything that had to do with sex, drugs, music, those were like psychology, and then all of the, classes that I was supposed to take. So I just kept going with the whole, cannabis and psychedelic sort of theme that I've had since, the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, I mean, all those subjects are like, they're deep dives into the human condition in many ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, people are really, it's not even, I don't find people that interesting. It's more like the science of it. Like, what does this thing do to people?
Yeah.
Weird things are interesting to me.
I'm with you on that. I love that. I love digging into things. So how did you make the transition into your work in cannabis?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. So, like I said, I started out doing animal anatomy and physiology, thinking maybe I wanted to be a vet. And then I realized that, I realized that if vets see a lot of pain and suffering, and I love animals, like that's why I thought maybe, whatever. Anyway, no, didn't want to do that. And I went to CSU for 5 years, almost graduated. I think I was 12 credits shy when I got pregnant. So I took some time off, ended up transferring to the University of Northern Colorado. They didn't have an animal anatomy and physiology or human anatomy and physiology program. So I switched to cellular and molecular because I thought, all right, maybe cancer research or something like that. And while I was there finishing up my bachelor's degree, I had to take a stupid plant taxonomy class. I wanted to take animal behavior, but it was full. There was no more spaces in the class, and there was several people on the waiting list. So I wasn't getting into that class. And if I didn't take an upper level biology class that semester, then I wasn't going to graduate on my timeline that I had set for myself. And so I registered for the stupid plant class, and it was taught by a really young professor. He was very excited about plants. He was very excited about teaching plant taxonomy. He had taken over the herbarium, and he's just like, fuck yeah, plants and botany. And we're all like, okay, like nobody likes plants, dude. You're weird. But anyway, turns out that, and I know this is a long story, but it's a good one.
No, I love it.
Turns out that, in order to graduate, not only did I need that class, but I also needed to take capstone credits, which I had not even thought about. And so my very last semester, I only had one class, which was molecular genetics, and it was only on Thursdays for like 6 hours. So I had all the other days were completely free. And I was like, Mitt, the new professor, Mitt McLaughlin, Mitt, do you have any work that I can do in your lab? Because I need to get 6 capstone credits. And he's like, 6 credits? That's a lot. That's like 100 hours in one semester. And I was like, I only have this one class, so I can be in the lab like all the time doing whatever you need me to do. He's like, all right. So we have this cactus project through the Denver Botanic Gardens and the Bureau of Land Management. We need all of these cacti. We need the DNA extracted. Can you do that? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. Just teach me how to do the extractions. So I started extracting cactus DNA. Cactus, as you know, are really sticky and mucousy. So it turns out that DNA extraction from cactus is not as easy as regular plants. So I had to do some like finagling to get it to work. And then I also learned like PCR and then how to run gels and things like that. So got a lot of bench experience that semester. And while I was in his lab, he had a PhD student. And I would talk to Jerry or JJ, he goes by both. But I would talk to him about grad school. And I thought, maybe I want to get a master's degree. And so in between me graduating with my bachelor's degree and me applying to the master's program in Mitt's lab, I went to the Denver Botanic Gardens and got this botanical illustration degree as well. Like just really super quick, like, and then I applied to the master's program, got in, and at first he was like, I don't think you want to do that. I don't think grad school is for you. And I was like, I think I will like it. And he's like, okay, well, all right, we'll take a chance on you. So I got in and I picked up the project from where I left off doing the cactus project. And the project was looking at a rare and protected Colorado cactus that grows along with a very closely related cactus, but is prolific. And so the hybridization of those two sister species was problematic because if something is being hybridized, then it doesn't warrant protection anymore under the Endangered Species Act. And so the land managers, well, really the gas and oil exploration people wanted to know, are there hybrid populations that we can just mow over because they're hybrid? They're hybrid populations, therefore don't warrant protection? So that was my task, was like figure out, where the hybrid populations are, where the pure populations are. Turns out they weren't really hybridizing. What they were doing, it was the difference in morphology was really more due to environmental factors and resources more than them hybridizing. One had hooked spines, one had straight spines, and the hooked ones were looking straight. And so they're like, oh yeah, they're totally hybridizing. They weren't. And actually that work resulted in the rare one being split into 2 different species. So now they're both even more rare. And after I graduated with my master's, I went and worked at the Denver Botanic Gardens from 2012 to 2015. And as we all know, of course, with our cannabis legalization history, Colorado legalized adult use in that time frame. Yeah. And so during that time, I had a lot of conversations with some of my friends, some of my colleagues. And one of the big questions was, how come when I go to the dispensary and I buy Blue Dream, and then I go to a different dispensary and I buy Blue Dream, they are completely different in effects? And I was like, that's a really easy question to answer. Like all we have to do is go buy Blue Dream from multiple different dispensaries and then see if they're genetically the same, because they should be, because we all know that Blue Dream is clone only. So I had this brilliant idea I wanted to do this work, right? And so I went to Amit and I was like, hey, I got this really good idea. Cannabis, there's not that much research. It's this new industry. It's everywhere. People have questions. Can I do a PhD? And he was like, no, absolutely not. We are a rare plant population genetics lab, not a pot lab. And I was like, well, fuck. So then I went home with my tail between my legs. And I was like, okay, well, I need to look for a different job. So anyway, he emailed me and I thought he asked me to come into his office. I thought it was going to be about the cactus project that we were still working on. And it wasn't. He was like, do you still want to do that cannabis thing? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, you're in. I guess he had talked to his wife and his wife was like, somebody's going to do it. Why not you? Like, you don't have to do the work. Just Anna will do all the work, and it's really interesting stuff. It's no one else is doing it. And so he was like, fine. And he went and talked to like the president and then the provost and the dean and the chair and the lawyers. And they were all like, yeah, she can do it as long as she doesn't bring smokable product onto campus. That's fine. So that is how I got a PhD in cannabis. And, it just kind of snowballed from there, being one of the only people in the United States has actually gotten to work on THC type cannabis, specifically the cannabis that you can buy at the store. It wasn't grown for me. Nobody knew I was a scientist. I would just go into the dispensaries and be like, I will have a gram of pot, please. Or whatever. And so I loved every second of it. I ended up with 5 chapters looking at, first genetic variation, then chemical variation, then like, can people smell the difference between things that are genetically identical and genetically different? And then the last thing that I wasn't even looking for that I found was the numbers on the labels are incredibly inflated from what's actually in the package. Yeah. So that's kind of what I did.
That's so cool. I love that. What was the biggest misconception that you had about cannabis before you started the research?
I don't really know. I didn't really know a lot. Like I took a lot of classes and I read a lot of books about, what was it? White Rabbit and like, some Tim Robbins. Is it Tim Robbins, Tom Robbins? I don't know. Anyway, I read a lot of books to do with drugs, but I really didn't know that much. Like everybody knows what a cannabis leaf looks like. Totally. I had, of course, a little bit of experience helping somebody grow it. Obviously we bought it, we smoked it, but I didn't, back in the 90s, when you were purchasing weed, it didn't usually come with a name. Yep. It was usually either Kind or Swag or Mexican Brickweed or Kind Bud from, maybe it was Kind Bud from Eureka, California, or Kind Bud from the Emerald Triangle. Oh, it's really crystally. Oh, it's got red hairs. Sometimes it would come with, this is OG Kush or, whatever, but it didn't come with a name usually. It was just, are we spending $50 or are we spending $100? And you kind of got what you got. And so, I had heard like strain names. It's like there's some that, everyone's familiar with OG Kush and Purple Kush and, some of those old timey vintage strains, but I really didn't know a whole lot. I did know that a lot of it was propagated clonally, which made my job very easy. But yeah, I didn't realize how much. I mean, and it makes sense with it being illegal for so long that there was a lot of underground growing, trading, breeding going on. So not a lot of record keeping, there wasn't a lot of research to pull from. So having basically, most of the research was like on THC and CBD on people, like right. In terms of the plant research, there really wasn't a whole lot. And so looking for information, like peer-reviewed science information, was dang near impossible. And when I had to do things like cite the Marijuana Bible or, Ed Rosenthal's book, like Mitt's like, I have Clark and Merlin's book and some stuff from Ernest Small, but Mitt's like, you need to find papers. And I'm like, there aren't any. There just isn't. And so, I had to look to other crops like tomatoes and apples and grapes and hops to make parallel sort of, but cannabis is so weird because it's been illegal for so long. And then there's just nothing like it. Like people have been able to research on the cocaine plant, what are
coca plant. Yeah.
And like poppies, like they're not illegal to research, right? So there's information on the actual plant that's not true for cannabis. There just isn't. Weird. And so that was probably my biggest surprise, is that there's just not a whole lot of information. At least there wasn't when I started. And when the 2000, it wasn't even the 2014 Farm Bill that really opened it up, but it wasn't really until 2018 that academic institutions started having like hemp programs. The Institute of Cannabis Research was started at CSU, I think in 2015, 2016, something like that, where they had a cannabis research program, but they taught classes, but no touching in the plant, no looking at the plant, no bringing the plant onto campus. It was basically just book learnings.
You see, that's the thing that gets me. So, because I was teaching at higher learning institutions and healthcare institutions, and people would ask me back in the day, like, well, what are your credentials? Do you have a degree in it? I'm like, we are figuring all of this out right now. And really, when you think about it, it's one of the singular times in recent history where we kind of had to build everything. There was no institutionalization around it. And for a society that's built on institutionalization, it was a bit of a quandary for everybody. Still smoking joints? Okay, we need to talk. If you love cannabis but you're still lighting it, let's look at what's actually happening. When you burn flower, you're creating smoke, and that smoke contains harmful compounds like tar, soot, benzene, and formaldehyde. In fact, almost 200 different compounds have been detected in joint smoke. So how do we know this? PAX decided to study it. In controlled lab testing, they compared joint smoke to vapor from their devices, using the same flower under the same conditions, and measured 16 key harmful compounds. The result is pretty striking. Vaporization reduced those compounds by more than 95%, because when you heat cannabis instead of burning it, you change what you inhale. You still get cannabinoids and flavor, just without all the extra stuff that comes from smoke. This isn't about judgment, it's about information. If you want to learn more, go to pax.com/science. PAX is setting higher standards so you can smoke less smoke. And for Planted listeners, get 20% off at pax.com with code PLANTED20.
And there sure as shit aren't that many experts, because we look to like academic professors that have been researching something for decades to be our experts. And there just aren't any. Like anybody teaching cannabis at any university has not been researching it for decades, right? And so the experts that we have to look to are the folks in the legacy market. So the people who have written the books, the people who have written the articles, and even then, the breadth of the literature, or the amount of literature comparatively, is very small. Because it's illegal. If you write a book about it and say that you've been growing it, bam, you've been doing illegal activities, right? So
yeah.
So very brave folks that have written some of these books, because how did they get that information? We know how they got that information. They were growing it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's where you have to look for some of this historical information, and it's getting, there's more research and things that are being published now, but and then looking back beyond Prohibition, like pre-Prohibition, with some of the doctors and things and ancient Chinese literature and the writings that are around. But even then, it's like still not very much information surrounding the plant.
Yeah. And as we're starting to have, collectors of old genetics come forward, we're starting to realize that, I mean, we talk about THC, you know, the breeding of plants to have more THC and less of the, I'll say, minor cannabinoids, even though I don't think that they're minor by any stretch of the imagination. But when we look at things like, I was talking to somebody about, and I bumped my mic there, about Panama Red and how, those genetics were generally a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC. Like, we saw a lot more of a balance of cannabinoids and a lot of the older genetics that we're not seeing today through selective breeding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to hear more people talking about land races and taking everything down and having it be a little bit more balanced now that we're getting out of this illicit mindset of the more bang for your buck, like super high octane cannabis, because what we're also learning is that THC percentages aren't the end all be all. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that THC has been incredibly hyped, not necessarily through consumer experience, but because of the regulations. They've made it the thing that is front and center. You have to have THC on the packet so that people will know how high they're going to get, even though that is not indicative of how high you're going to get at all. And in fact, the higher the THC, many people are finding that it's not as pleasurable of an experience as when the lower numbers. I don't think, the only reason I think that THC needs to be on a packet, needs to be available to the consumer, is for people who are making their own medicine and need to dose themselves correctly in terms of THC. But for the regular consumer, like, it could be on the inside of the packet. It could be, like an ingredients list. I think we need to look at, the abundant cannabinoids and the less abundant cannabinoids more like ingredients. And I always think about food, right? Who doesn't? But like a people know how to read an ingredients list, right? The most abundant thing is the first thing that's listed on an ingredient list. And then as you go through the list, it's less things that are in there. However, if you, let's say you got a packet cake, of course, the first thing on there is going to be flour. Is flour what makes the cake interesting or better? No. It just is in there because it's part of what makes cake cake. Just like THC is part of what makes cannabis cannabis. And as you go through the list, you're going to come across sugar, right? You're going to put in some eggs and some butter. Probably, it's probably not in the cake mix. Then you're going to come across some flavor type things, like maybe it's a chocolate cake. So there's going to be some cocoa powder or whatever. And as you get further into the list, you start seeing weird stuff like nutmeg, raisin powder, cinnamon, and things like that. And that's where I think the interesting things are, because it's not abundance that equals potency. It's something else. Like, a cup of sugar is not the same as a cup of salt, right? A pinch of habanero powder is not the same as a splash of soy sauce. Those two things are not the same. So even though one might be more abundant than the other, there's a reason for that. And and potency is a perceived effect. We use it totally wrong in the cannabis space. Potency is not a measure of how much is in something like Advil. 200 milligrams is not the potency of the Advil. It just has 200 milligrams of Advil in it, or, of ibuprofen in it.
Right.
2 Advil might be potent enough for me to get rid of a headache. 4 Advil might be potent enough for you. So that's the potency, is the effect on the person. So that's also, like, I feel like creating confusing, because we're now talking about a percentage as potency. So people are thinking 30% is more potent because it means it has a bigger effect on me. And so those are my thoughts on THC. And yes, I do think that, well, in our it's kind of like a vicious circle. So we are required to measure the THC. Price is based on the THC percent. You can't sell, if you're a cultivator, you can't sell anything below 22% because the dispensary won't buy it, because they can't sell it, because the consumer thinks that the higher the THC, the higher the potency, and the price is set on that. And the consumer thinks that the higher the price, the higher the quality, because that's how they're conditioned to do it. And it's like this big vicious cycle. And I'm not sure how to break it other than education.
I think education is key. I mean, we have to have those conversations because, When we were in medicinal here in California, and even in the beginning of legalization, that was how we created safe containers for experimentation for people, so they could understand that, you could have something at 13% with a really interesting terpene profile and other cannabinoids in there, and it could be a very impactful experience. It wasn't going to be something that was like nothing. And it also depends on like you were saying, the individual. We're walking chemistry experiments. What are you dealing with? Like, are you using it to relax? Are you using it for something else? But, when we're looking at, the THC percentages, and then we're looking at the mass hybridization of flowers, like everything seems to be crossed with whatever is the hot cultivar of the moment. How much variation actually exists in cannabis compared to how it's marketed?
That's a great question. And I honestly, the people who are consider themselves, connoisseurs or experts have moved on from THC to terpenes.
Yep.
However, if you look at the terpene profiles, there's really only like 6 dominant terpenes as well. Again, with the abundant bullshit, right? Caryophyllene, it's in everything. Myrcene, it's in everything. Limonene is in everything. Like, how much are these terpenes lending to the effect when we know they're in everything? Like, it's just another, it's like sugar. It's in every cake. Like, you can't make a cake without sugar, some sort of sweetener. So I don't even think we should be looking at the major terpenes. I think, science needs to dig deeper. We've been picking the low-hanging fruit for long enough and haven't found the answers yet, because I think we're looking in the wrong spot. It's always easy to do the easiest thing. I think now that we're past that. It's time to start doing the hard stuff. Looking at, things that are less abundant or weird, or that we're not even expecting, some of the esters, thiols, flavorants, things like that. And I know there are some groups out there that have moved on. Abstracts is doing some really cool stuff. And I just saw a post on TikTok this morning where the guy was saying, have you ever opened a jar and just had it just smack you in the face? Like that skunk smell. He's like, that's not the terpenes. That's the volatile sulfur compounds that'll do that. And they are volatile, so they don't last that long if you don't store them correctly, right? So I forgot what your question was, and if I even answered it.
Well, it definitely went down that rabbit hole, because it is like we were talking about like how much variation we actually see. But, if we aren't looking at those things, how can we really tell what kind of variation there is? Because like you said, we're concentrating on, the terpenes and the cannabinoids, which are prevalent, and there are several that you see in everything. So how can that determine the variation? So maybe we're just not there yet to really determine that.
I think that the idea to bring back some of the land races and start inserting some diversity into the gene pool is an excellent idea.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the vast majority of things on most dispensary shelves is going to be a really small, for the most part, gene pool. It partly because, like you said, everybody's kind of breeding with the popular stuff, right? So we've got, everything's related to Skittles or gelato or whatever. I do think that, the large multi-state operators, they are breeding their own stuff, but within their own gene pool. Rarely are they bringing in, weird stuff, THCV, or, land races and things like that. Like Cookies is breeding in their own gene pool. Mr. Soul from Brothers Grimm, he's breeding within his gene pool. He made Apollo and G13 and Cinderella 99, and most of his strains are sort of related to those that sort of original gene pool. So I do think we have pockets of diversity, and we do have the potential to pull in more genetic diversity if we expand beyond what we're currently working with. But it's going to take some really experimental breeders, some really brave breeders, and not the ones that are working for large MSOs, because that's not how they make their money. They make their monies on yields and THC percent.
And
so
bag appeal. Which is the stupidest thing ever, because I've had some amazing cannabis that does not have the bag appeal that people would
Yeah.
there's a wide swath that we love, but I want to back it up just a second. So, for those who are listening who may not be as familiar with this stuff, when we say cannabis genetics, what are we actually talking about?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. So, when people say cannabis genetics, what they're really thinking about, most people, they're thinking about a phenotype, right? They're thinking, okay, so you have this genetic and I have this genetic, and they've never looked at a piece of DNA or a gene or anything. They're looking at trait expression, which of course does come from the genotype, but it also comes from the environment. And so really what they're talking about is a phenotype. And there are also, so when I say that I am a cannabis geneticist, people automatically go, oh, you're a breeder or you're a cultivator. And I'm like, nope. Nope, am not. Not either of those. And there are actually, like, if we talk about genetics in a scientific sense, there are actually 3 branches of genetics. The first branch is related to heritability and how things are passed on to the next generation, which is what a breeder would do. They find interesting traits, they breed 2 things together, they select the offspring that have the most desirable traits. Okay, so that's the first branch of genetics. There's molecular genetics. Those folks actually look at genes, the structure of chromosomes, what genes are turned on, what genes are turned off, like what's going on with the DNA. That would also be, folks who are doing like CRISPR editing or even inserting different genes into various other organisms. There's not a lot of that going on in cannabis, even though people think there is. There's really not. And then there's population genetics, which is what I do, which is looking at the relationships within and among closely related individuals. So like think about 23andMe, right? That's population genetics. When you're looking at groups of people and how they're related and how much of this thing you have in you and hybridization and how how things are flowing between these different groups. And so I think when someone says genetics, it means different things to different people depending on who you talk to. Like I know people who have geneticist in their LinkedIn profile, but they're a breeder, right? And I'm like, technically a geneticist has to go to school to learn all these things, by definition, but I wouldn't necessarily like dismiss somebody who has years of breeding experience and say they're not a geneticist. They're just not a classically trained or whatever geneticist. But they do understand like the laws of inheritance and how traits are passed and how to, bring out expressions. So yeah, it just means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But yeah, you stole my genetics. That phrase.
You would hear a lot. Yeah.
Can I have some of your genetics? It's like, okay, I don't know how to feel about that.
It's like it seems like in many ways, and it's not just in this area, but in a lot of areas around cannabis, we're in desperate need of a new lexicon.
Yeah, I've been writing a lot about that recently, actually.
Yeah.
I co-wrote a chapter in a book from this book. Let me grab it. This book, because I know it's backwards, but it's called The Cannabis Genome.
Oh, it's actually not backwards.
It's not?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Good. So The Cannabis Genome. So this is a bunch of different authors, sciencey type people. Kevin Jodary wrote a chapter in here. Matthew Gates wrote a chapter in here. Angel Fernandez from My Flora DNA wrote a chapter in here. Daniela Vergara and I wrote the first chapter in here, which is called The Debated Nomenclature of Cannabis Sativa. And it has stuff like mutants. This is all cannabis, even though like, especially like that middle one does not look like cannabis.
Right.
And so it just kind of goes through like phenotype, genotype, chemotype. What does genetics mean? What is a land race? Because it doesn't mean just wild growing cannabis. It's got a specific, so we kind of go through all that. And then, I just wrote another chapter for a book, which hasn't come out yet. I'll let you know, but about why do species matter and what it means in cannabis. Because you ask any scientist, any real scientist, what's a species? you're going to get a different answer from every single one of them, because we can't put nature into neat little boxes, because anytime you try to do that, nature says, hold my beer. And cannabis is very good at that. Like, cannabis just doesn't follow any of the rules, which makes it even more interesting than it already is.
This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm going to be going on 20 years very soon in the industry and the movement. And I think that's one of the things that captures my imagination more than anything, is that we're always learning new stuff. We're constantly being proven wrong. And it's kind of a reflection on like our modern times, where we're constantly inundated by things, but we're also this instant gratification, mix and serve society where we want all the standardization, but we're always being shown that nature doesn't work that way. And then we get disappointed, shocked. We go from things being wonderful to things being scary and weird and bad, depending on what kind of clickbait you're reading these days. And it's like, I think that cannabis is really a reflection on just like the general nuance of like living.
Yeah. Something that, always comes to mind, I'm a very, I'm a scientist. I generally have blind, if I'm looking for an answer, I don't get side, like we're just talking about this thing, right?
Right.
Something that I've been struggling with lately and is in part of this book chapter that is coming out is, and actually I'm talking on Sunday at a women's conference about this topic, is, the nomenclature and the consistency of the conversation, communication, how it's confusing for consumers, right? Which is our end of, like, that's who we're here for, is the consumers. If we don't have consumers, we don't have an industry.
Right.
And we're confusing the shit out of them. And one of the things that comes to mind first and foremost is the idea of indica and sativa.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm glad you're bringing it up.
Like I know that, indica and sativa are proposed described species that are adapted to different environments. The indicas are cooler climate, higher altitudes. The sativas are more equatorial. They're taller, spindlier, etc. And they have different morphologies, right? Indica, sativa, different species. And then we have this idea of effects, indica, sativa. And science hasn't found any correlation to morphology and chemistry, which are what causes effects. But we go back to that idea of, we haven't looked at everything. We were only looking at the major terpenes and cannabinoids, and then we're only looking at parts of the genome. And to say that there's no such thing as indica and sativa, when people say, yes, these two things are clearly different. They are. And I'm not saying that indica will make you sleepy and sativa will make you uplifted, because everybody's different. Stop telling people how to feel. But they are different. Like, this is this, and this is a sativa, and this is an indica. Go home, see how they work on you. Some people can't tell the difference. They're just like, weed is weed. But there are people who are like, yeah, this is something that I wouldn't want to take at night, because it's going to keep me up. I want to go clean the house. And this is not something I want to take, when I want to actually get up and do something, because I'm going to fall asleep, or, a multitude of other effects. This one makes me anxious. This one, these ones make me relaxed, like whatever. But I see indica and sativa as bucket categories for people to start making preference-based decisions on how they feel, right? Not how you told them how they're going to feel. And I think that I point towards the golden winged and the blue winged warbler. They are 99.7% identical in their genomes, and yet they're different colors. They have different songs. They have different behaviors. And they are different species. And what if the cannabis is like that? What if there is just a few little parts of the genome that differ that make it indica sativa? What if it's something like THCP that's only found in very incredibly small amounts in only some cannabis that may be lending to those effects where people are like, this is different than that, right? So I don't like people saying there's no such thing as indica and sativa. I think there is. We just haven't found it yet. And it would make sense that there is, because the indica and sativa type morphologies were born out of adapting to different regions, different geography, different pathogens, different pest pressures. And so the way that plants react to their environment is chemicals, right? They exude terpenes and cannabinoids and other things to either attract or deter predators, pathogens. And so these two plants that have adapted in these two different regions, therefore have two different morphologies, it would make sense that they make different chemicals. We just haven't looked at the right ones yet, right?
Right. I mean, that's when I used to teach my classes, I would talk about, I'd take out the pictures. It's like indica, sativa, ruderalis. And we have the conversation about the difference between a morphology and what you're seeing on your menu. Because really, like on a dispensary menu, it's shorthand for these are the ones that a majority of human beings are feeling more energized and clear-headed with. These are the ones on this side of the menu that a lot of people are finding relaxing or sleepy or what have you. But that doesn't necessarily mean most of them are hybridized for the most part. They're not even true indicas or sativas. And, your mileage may vary, because I know when, I've worked with thousands of people, and especially people who have interesting brain chemistries will behave completely the opposite of how the majority of human beings respond. And that's you lean in, right?
That's the same with that's the same with other substances as well. Somebody who has ADHD who's taking Adderall is going to have a completely different experience than someone who doesn't, who takes Adderall. Let's say you have ADHD, you take Adderall. Now you can focus, you can pay attention, you can get your things done. I don't have ADHD. I take Adderall. I'm going to be completely dysfunctional, disjointed. My thoughts are going to race. I'm not
the rocket ship. Yeah.
I know somebody gave me an Adderall once and they were like, you need to get your chapter for your thesis written. Here, take this. You'll get it done in one day. Oh, I got it done in one day. Was it good? Fuck no. My advisor handed it back to me and said, you need to start over. This is trash. And I cried, but I was like, well, that's what I get for trying to cut corners. Caffeine, same thing.
Yeah.
It does different things to different people. And so and antidepressants, you go into a doctor's office and you say, I'm a little bit sad. And the doctor says, well, here's something that works well for most people. You go home, you have nightmares, you have suicidal thoughts, you gain 20 pounds. You go back to the doctor and you say, I really don't like this. The doctor will say, okay, so that one's not for you. So try this one, because this one also seems to work well. Then you do some adjustments. You can up the dose, down the dose, add something else. Same with cannabis, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to find the magic pill on the first try. There is always trial and error with substances that you are looking for a specific effect from.
Yeah, and it's an exercise, and it's a call to grounding and being more aware of the fact that everything we put in our bodies creates a reaction, because we're so we so badly just want some magic thing that fixes things instead of actually taking the responsibility. I mean, some of us do, but I think that it's really important that we do take that moment to pause and actually think about, how do I feel before I try this? And how am I feeling afterwards? Am I tracking this? Especially with cannabis. Because when I was in the dispensaries, one of the things that I would get was somebody would come with a bag full of stuff, dump it in front of me and be like, I'm trying to use cannabis for, whatever it is. And it's not working. And I'd look at him and I'd say, well, what happened? And then they would just furrow their brow. They'd be like, I don't know. All I know is that it's not giving me what I need. And so it's the first step is to take a step back, take a deep breath, and actually be really present during the experience, because it actually informs you more than you could ever know. Even if the I always tell people, even if the outcome isn't what you expected, you've just collected a lot of really valuable information on how you personally process whatever product you've been, experimenting with. And that will help direct you towards either something that will work, or the fact that, cannabis isn't for everybody. Even though we create our own, endocannabinoids, not all of us are good with cannabis. And guess what? That's okay, because we are all different. And I think in this world where, we jump to conclusions sometimes when something isn't right for us, and it must not be right for everybody, or anybody, I should say, it opens that conversation about, well, is that so? I mean, I think that people should have access to what works well for them. And, and people shouldn't feel like they failed if it doesn't work well for them, because, as we've gotten a legalization and everyone's like, oh, or CBD, when everyone's like, CBD is amazing, it does all these things. And it's like, well, you know what? Some people don't have good reactions to it. Some people get really anxious, get really activated by it. Or I have a friend who even the smallest amount of CBD in a product will put her into a general malaise that lasts for days. Does it mean CBD is bad? No, but it does mean that for some people, it's not the answer.
I would agree with that 100%. Yeah, we've got a whole industry now telling everybody that cannabis is great, cannabis is wonderful, higher THC, better experience. And I always tell people, like, if you want a high THC, that's fine, but it's probably not flower that you're looking for. Like, you can always supplement your flower if that's what you want with a concentrate and up your THC, but high THC is definitely not for everybody. And yeah, like, so we've got this whole industry that's telling people that cannabis is amazing and it does all these things. So then, there's a novice who says, oh, I'd like to try a little bit of pot, and they go to the store and they get their pot and they get their little lighter or however they're going to smoke. And then they smoke or vape or whatever. And then they hate it. And it's like, now they think there's something wrong with them because this wonderful substance that everybody has been raving about, you don't like it. It makes you feel like shit and uncomfortable in your own skin, and it lasts forever, and you just want to crawl up in a ball and die, and you don't know if you're breathing. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
Your soup tastes furry. I don't know.
It's just wrong on so many levels.
It's not right. And then you get this idea that maybe that maybe there's something wrong with you, right? And then you don't want to talk to anybody about it because now you feel like, an outcast or something. Anyway, the whole thing is just, we need to have better conversations.
Yeah, it really shows that's where education really comes in. Maybe not in like the, some people don't do well sitting in a classroom, but like having the conversations, because conversations are education, conversations are normalization, as I always like to say. But, when we're looking at this and we're looking at the consumer experience, and we've talked a lot about the science, but what do you think the biggest disconnect between the science and how cannabis currently is marketed and sold? What do you think is the biggest disconnect with that?
Well, first of all, that, the traditional route for research is through academia.
Yeah.
Right? They're supposed to be the non-biased, non-partisan places where we get research done that's not funded by, somebody looking for a biased answer or whatever. And so that is definitely a large block to science, along with the lack of funding, because it's still illegal. We don't have the regular grants. Well, whatever. I won't go into that, but the normal pathways to get money to fund the research is not available for cannabis. So that's a big issue. And then, the way that scientists talk about cannabis and sort of dismiss everything and everyone who's come before us. So, the term bro science is tossed around a lot. I get it. It just means that somebody who's not a formally classically trained scientist has looked into something and come up with an answer, but because it's not a real scientist, it's not real science, so it's bro science. And it's like, but dude, like, some of these people are scientists. I mean, although they didn't go to school for it, some of these growers and breeders are very meticulous about, asking questions, making observations, writing it down, repeating that same thing. That is literally what science is, right? They are scientists. And so when somebody who has been cultivating for 20 years says, I do this, this works, this is what happens, and somebody says, well, that's bro science because science, we haven't found that. It's like, maybe we weren't looking in the right places. Scientists just really pulled up a seat at this table, this cannabis industry table. We just got here. Like I said, there are no like academic experts in cannabis. It's really only been legal for really a decade, and definitely not in research institutions. And so I think that the scientists, being the newcomers to the group, need to shut the fuck up and listen to what the people who have been around for decades are saying, and try to figure out why they're saying what they're saying, what is leading to that. Like, we need to find the answers to the questions that they've already answered, but they don't know like how to explain it. That's our job.
Yeah.
And I really, it pisses me off, some of these scientists.
I mean, we're seeing that even in other things like, plant medicine, herbalism, different things that were like ancient remedies, where now science is able to explain why they work. But, the people who came up with it originally, they weren't scientists, or they were in their own way, but they weren't,
or they were women.
Or they were women. Yeah, there's that too. But it's like when I went back to school after cancer, one of the things that I was part of my studies was looking at research methodologies and bias, and basically the decolonialization of research methodologies. Where do you think bias comes in with cannabis research that you're seeing today? Because I know it's like, there are also those really important things of like, traditionally a lot of the research that was done around cannabis was a workaround because somebody was interested in the good that it would do, but had to do the research under the auspices of potential harm. How do you think like preloading bias in cannabis research affects what we're getting?
So that's a great question, and perhaps I'm not the best person to ask that to, because I'm really interested in the plant, not so much in the people.
Right.
And so like clinical research and finding out what it does to people, and how it works in the body, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. But I think that a lot of bias comes from, and I personally don't subscribe to this, is making hypotheses.
Yeah.
Like making a guess of what's going to happen, because you already came to a conclusion in your mind about what should happen, right? And so I've had this conversation before, but I think science is better served to come up with aims, have it be more exploratory as opposed to outcome driven. Why is this thing different than this? I don't know. Let's have a look. Like, instead of, I think these two things are different because of this, this, and this. Now let's find out if this, this, and this are true.
Yeah.
And the idea of being significant, like if it's not less than 0.05, if the p-value is not less than 0.05, then it's not significant. If it's 0.06, it's not significant. It's like, dude, really? Like, that's hard. It's that hard of a line. And so saying, there's a trend towards this, or that, I really don't like, research that starts with a hypothesis. You can start with a question, but coming up with the answer before you've tested anything is just really weird to me.
Yeah, because like you were talking about before, there could be something that's showing up in very small amounts that's making an amazing difference in how it's all turning out. Like, it's so impactful. And to go in looking for something that's going to, be like right in your face, having a hypothesis that that's what it's going to be, you are missing out on the subtleties.
Yeah. Like my mom says, not all the science is in yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it. And that's what I love. Like, I mean, I don't love people yelling at each other over social media about things. But I do love the fact that we're always learning and we are always being, proven wrong. And I'm really excited to see, what we come up with. But I mean, I think in many ways we're building an industry on, misunderstood data because of that. What are your thoughts with that?
Um, I I think that the cool thing about science is that we change our minds based on how the evidence, right?
Right.
The more evidence we collect, it doesn't matter if we have a mountain of evidence right now that says THC is going to destroy your brain, right? We know that all of that is crap science because, they all had biases and that's what they wanted to show. We are now gathering evidence, right? New evidence to show that cannabis can actually protect your brain. It can be a neuroprotectant. So now we've got dueling, research. And as the evidence grows one way or the other, we can change our minds to say, you know what, I used to think that cannabis destroyed your brain, but now there's this new evidence that says that it's actually a neuroprotectant. And here's all the evidence showing that. Look at all of these study participants. Look at all this, look at these cells that are growing new myelin. Look at these Parkinson's patients. So I feel unlike I'm going to say something really controversial. Unlike religion, we can change our minds based on the evidence.
Right.
And so I think that we're kind of strolling down that path where we're able to do more research, gather more evidence. And I think that at the end of the day, whenever that is, probably next Friday, we will find that the evidence is starting to mount against what the traditional thought process from, research that was paid for by NIDA or, whoever.
Yeah.
Big tobacco or I don't know who, big alcohol, big pharma, whoever is funding it to make, to
Whoever's got the big pockets.
Yeah, it's somebody big, yeah. I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. I want to shift into a little bit with cultivation and breeding. What should cultivators actually be prioritizing if they want reliable outcomes?
Oh boy. Well, in my humble opinion, it all starts with genetics, right? It starts with a consistent genotype. So this thing needs to be the same or very similar to this thing, to this thing, to this thing. And traditionally, we've done that through clonal propagation, vegetative propagation, cutting bits off of moms and then growing them. I think that method is okay. I also think it introduces stress into both the mom and the poor little plantlets that now have to make roots and grow all by themselves now. There hasn't been a whole lot of stabilizing genetics like we do with other crops or dogs or, whatever. That takes a lot of time, effort, resources, money to be able to create a stable line, which in cannabis, you can't go to the plant variety protection office and register your new strain or your new cultivar because they'll laugh at you and say, oh, that's illegal. You can't, no. Ha. So at the end of the day, there's not a lot of incentive for breeders to do that work because somebody can just steal it. Right.
Right.
And so I think there needs to be a new system that sort of skirts the traditional pathway for people to register their crop, their new creations. I think it's an art form. And I've actually been doing a lot of work on this, published a paper about how we might be able to do that. And it's not about necessarily ownership, but let's say, Blue Dream is clone only, but I like to use it because everybody has heard of Blue Dream. But let's say I have a really fire strain of Blue Dream. Maybe it's not even the same Blue Dream as everybody else. Maybe it got mislabeled along the way or, whatever. But I've got this really great strain of Blue Dream that everybody loves. I can't own that because I'm not the original breeder. I can't claim ownership to that. However, I can license it out. This is the Blue Dream that I have in my hot little hands. If you want to grow my amazing Blue Dream, sure, I'll give you cuts and I'll license it out to you and you can grow it. And then, we'll make another, license or agreement next year. And this is how almost every other crop operates. And this is how it's done. And I don't see why we can't do it in cannabis, other than there is no pathway to do that. And there's a lot of people stealing people's genetics and relabeling. And, how are you supposed to know what you're growing if there is so much inconsistency, so much confusion? I've had things that had the same name that were genetically different. I've had things that were genetically the same that had different names.
Yep. Especially around sales, like, what name's
Right.
selling.
Right. So you've got, let's just use cookies as an example. You got cookies that has their own, strains that they've developed. They put a lot of money into it. They sell it to, let's say, a grower out here in New Jersey. They have a licensing agreement, which Cookies does that. So the New Jersey company pays Cookies. The next year, they don't renew the contract, but they have a new strain called Cherry Water Ice, for example. They've just renamed it.
Yeah.
It's still cookies that they're growing, and they've just, made clones and called it something else. Now they don't have to pay Cookies anymore because it's no longer, it's no longer black cherry gelato. Now it's Cherry Water Ice. It's ours. So now Cookies, they're not getting paid for their work, for their art, for their creation, right? And so I know this is super controversial because people are like, nobody should own the plant. No, nobody's owning the plant. What you are entitled to, though, is protection of your creation, your work, your art. And that is true in any industry. If you create a painting, right? Anybody can look at it. You can probably print it out and put it in your own home if you like. However, if you print it or repaint it and then sell it as yours, you can get in a lot of trouble for that.
Yep.
That's stealing, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of conversation around this right now, and it's all because cannabis is illegal still.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got a long ways to go.
Back to your question. If a cultivator wants consistency in their grow, first they need to make sure, number one, they need to figure out what they're growing. Is it genetically correct? Which, again, we're working on that. Doing clones is great, and you can get consistency from that. But after a couple of rounds, some moms just don't do well, and they, there's a decline. There's mutations that accumulate. Things change. You get a different, chemical profile because the plant thinks that it's being munched on every time it gets cut. Things happen, right? I think seeds could be a lot more stable if we had breeders that were able to or wanting to inbreed their lines, to stabilize their lines, to make sure that the genetics, grow true to type every single time. That's not happening in cannabis. The other thing we can do is tissue culture is up and coming. So you can, there's quite a few companies, I believe, that are putting their moms into tissue culture, making sure that they're clean and disease free, keeping them in suspended animation, and renewing their moms every few cycles. So not only are they making sure that the new moms are disease free, but also that they're not having that genetic decline where it starts to change over time. And if it does start to decline, you've got another one to grab from. Or if you get a disease in your mom, you've got another one to pull from. So you don't just lose your whole genetic line because you lost a mom to something like hop latent viroid.
Yeah. How can better science influence policy and regulation?
Shit, man, I don't know.
It's okay not to know. It's okay. This creates some conversations for the future.
I missed having any kind of political science course or any, I steered clear of all of that humanities shit in high school. I was never interested in politics. I barely know how a bill is passed. I don't know, and I'm not, I only just became an American citizen a few years ago. So I don't even, I only just figured out what the 3 branches of government are. So in terms of taking my science and going to Washington, D.C. or helping lawmakers figure out what to, I could help, I could read the document and be like, well, this is all wrong, or that's not how that works. Or actually we might want to put this in because of this, that, and the other. But in terms of connecting those two things, I don't know.
Well,
Call me.
I think that, because you are so into the science rather than the politics, I think that that's actually, in some ways, it can be a superpower because, well, like Bo Whitney will say that, policy is emotional. That's very emotional because he can come with all the statistics, but it's still going to be the emotions of the people who are wanting to influence policy that's going to really come through the most. But I think, when you have a scientist in the room actually bringing the facts of what is real and what is not, that, it can help cut through it. But we are still dealing with a very emotional issue when we look at, regulatory framework, policy. You like to think that it's logic, but it's certainly not. I mean,
yeah, I'm familiar with the phrase science informs policy.
yeah.
In reality, does that happen?
No.
I know it doesn't. It's money that informs policy.
Right. And then they grab onto science that they grab onto sound bites that suit them and they run with that rather than looking at the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of that. What excites you most about where cannabis science is headed?
Oh boy. I don't know. Like cannabis science is such a big umbrella.
It is.
Right?
You can answer it any way you want.
Like I said, I'm not super interested in how it works in the body or any of that stuff. Like, cool, like do that research, but I'm not that person. I also not super interested in locating genes and figuring out that I don't really care about that. I am super interested in finding out more about these less abundant constituents in the cannabis plant. I think, like I said, we need to stop grabbing at the low-hanging fruit. It's just stupid at this point. Like, we've already figured out that's not the thing. That's not the thing. All right, let's keep looking for the thing. Like, come on, man. and then assisting, breeders and growers, cultivators, and even consumers, helping them figure out this mess of all of these different names, all of these different genotypes, all of these different chemotypes. Like, let's get some consistency going because, as I said before, at the end of the day, we do this for the consumer. And honestly, there's so many places where we are doing disservice to the consumer, from telling them how they're going to feel, telling them that the highest THC is going to give them the best experience, not giving them correct names on the labels, not putting the correct potency, the correct THC number on the labels, telling them to look at the top 3 terpenes to drive their experience. Like, just the poor consumer at the end of the day can basically bank on never having a consistent experience.
Truth.
Even from the same dispensary, from grow to grow, you purchase the same thing. Like, the chance that cultivator tweaks something, nutrients, lights, something that's going to make it yield a little bit higher, get a little bit higher THC, like the chance of that happening from grow to grow and that consumer getting something from batch to batch that's different is incredibly high. Like, it's the consumers, man. Let's give some freaking consistency.
Yep. On that note, for people who want to follow your work, check out some of the books that you've taken part in, because you've written a lot. Follow you on social media, see what you're doing lately. How do they do that?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find. So I am on all the social medias. I'm most active on LinkedIn, and honestly, probably TikTok.
Okay.
I do have a TikTok channel, and I've started putting more cannabis related stuff up there as opposed to like personal, stuff. I do have my own website. I don't sell anything, so it's not like a, enter now, purchase this. It's just AnnaSchwabe.com. And you can find my CV, my resume, my research, my art, all of the companies that I work for and or have worked for. links to my classes, which are also available online through the Agricultural Genomics Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that I am on the board of directors for. And our mission is to educate people about genetics and genomics. And we're also looking for like farmers and cultivators to help us gather data so that we can start answering some of these questions, like how come when you grow this in Florida, it performs differently than when it grows in Oregon, right? Oh, and what are those differences? And so, yeah, probably my website. And then it's got all the links to all my socials. And
in your podcast, you started a podcast.
I forgot. How did I forget that? So I just started a podcast called My Flora Fridays, which is available on Spotify and YouTube. And it comes out every Friday, and it's a different guest every Friday. And I've got many lined up, many great guests lined up. And I did a Montel Williams, Let's Be Blunt, not too long ago, which people seem to enjoy that. I don't know. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff on my website. There's all kinds of interviews with me. Like I said, my research, you can read my dissertation. It's only like 200 pages long. So some light bathroom reading.
Oh, a light read. Yeah. I love it. And, we do have a lot of cultivators who listen. So all you cultivators out there, if you want to do some work with science, get a hold of Dr. Anna.
Yeah. Definitely hit me up, message me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Yep.
It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's so darn good to see you. And I was just on My Flora Fridays. It hasn't been released yet, but I'm really excited about our conversation on that as well. So, check out Anna's podcast. She's got great people on there. I'm not even including myself. You get a lot of great guests. It's a lot of fun. I love talking with you. I love your mind. You're welcome back anytime. So much fun, Anna. Thank you.
Oh my God, we could talk for days probably about cannabis. So if you need me to come back on, want me to come back on, of course.
Oh, always. But always down for geeking out with you.
This has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me on Planted with Sarah Payan.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sarah Payan on Facebook and Planted with Sarah on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsarah.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn. We are there. So join us, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.